Let's bring in Robert Ford now, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. He's also former US Ambassador to Syria, Iraq and Algeria. Robert, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Sir, famine, we are hearing, is imminent in Gaza, and 7 aid workers from World Central Kitchen were killed 6 months on from the beginning of this conflict. Is an immediate ceasefire going to happen?
I'm not involved in the negotiations, so I don't want to predict one way or the other, but I would say this: the negotiations are very difficult. They involve 3 key issues. Number one, the timing of a ceasefire. And second, they involve release of hostages. And it is important for viewers to understand that Hamas itself does not control all of the hostages. There are some other smaller armed Palestinian factions that also have hostages. And finally, there is the question of Gaza residents who had been displaced from the north side of the Gaza Strip being allowed to return to northern Gaza, to their homes.
How concerning and how problematic is it for a ceasefire to become a reality? Is it that arguably there is now another front in this conflict in Lebanon, and there is the risk, the non-negligible risk, that this could spread to the region with Iran's involvement?
So there certainly is a risk. Lebanon, the situation is difficult. It's tense. But I think viewers should also remember that there was a 10-day ceasefire last end of November and going into December, and that ceasefire actually worked quite well. Hostages were released. Hamas and some of the other factions released hostages. Humanitarian aid was delivered, surged and was delivered, and there was no fighting for about 10 days. It is possible to repeat that.
How much pressure is Benjamin Netanyahu under at home? We've seen mass protests calling on him to do everything to free the hostages. Does this help in terms of bringing forward a ceasefire?
If hostages were released, if the Palestinians would release hostages, it would certainly help Netanyahu's standing in the short term. But I think it's also important to remember that there are gigantic demonstrations in Tel Aviv demanding early elections and the removal of the Netanyahu government. And the prime minister's situation is difficult, but I think also he is a veteran politician and he is a political survivor.
And it's quite noteworthy, isn't it, Robert, that the Biden administration is taking a harder line on Israel as well. Same goes for the allies in the UK and in Europe. What does that tell you?
Well, I wouldn't go too far with that, because while the Biden administration verbally has taken a harder line and the president has verbally said that there might need to be a reassessment of American policy, at the same time, the Biden administration has not, to date, delayed arms deliveries, including the delivery of large, dumb bombs, not guided bombs, that the Israelis have used with devastating consequence in Gaza. So I think it's important to distinguish between what they actually do in concrete terms and what they say.